Hello, my friends. Welcome. I am Joaquin Cordero, and like every other week, we're bringing you some awesome stories from people who are doing things differently. Disruptors. They can be entrepreneurs. They can work at companies. They can be people who are doing things differently at sports. All of whom I think are successful people. Whatever success is for each, we're gonna ask this fantastic person we have invited today. It's a great friend whom I'm known for. I think it's 11 years now. Yeah,
Yeah, ran out of fingers. 11.
2013.
Yeah.
Andrew Blickstein, he is originally from New Jersey, lived for a long time in Chicago, a second home, and is now in Utah. He is a master in culture and in people. When I met him, he had founded and owned Home Run Media, a company similar or same industry as Lumen, which is focused on advertising, buying media, putting the brand out there. Sold it, and after that, started doing some coaching, which I think you're a fantastic coach. With the experience you have. We met, by the way, at EMP, Entrepreneurial Masters Program in 2013. It was in MIT. And we had some very good years there studying together. And after that, we started accountability group. And here's a great thing. We've been together in this accountability group since 2014. So it's been 10 years, and we meet every other week as well. And we share some experiences regarding some wins in life, some bottlenecks, red flags that are happening, what's in the horizon, etc. So Petra Coach was a company where you have some experience on, and I like to get a little more insight on that. But for now, if you could tell us a little bit about your childhood, Andrew, welcome.
Well, thank you, Joaquin. Great to see you as always every other week. We're just putting it on camera today. I grew up in a pretty idyllic suburban New Jersey environment. We were maybe 45 minutes or an hour outside of New York City. Um, all the parents were people who grew up in New York in the 50s and 60s. If you can think of all the wonderful films and media and programming around that, that's where they grew up. And then they all kind of moved out to the suburbs, and we were the kind of the suburbs in that era. Everyone on my block was the same age, seemingly, or at least within a little bit. The houses were built basically the year I was born, and we all had maybe younger siblings and older siblings. It was a wonderful environment. We did, we had school, a lot of the typical things, but there were exactly four things we did as a child, which is we played stickball, we played Nerf football, we played street hockey, just depending on the season. And when it got too dark, we played a game called Kick the Can, which is basically a hide and seek type of game. And for the most part, we were, the latchkey kid generation where our parents, largely both of our parents, all of our parents worked. I still cook to this day, but I learned to cook because, my mom used to call me up and say, what, call me up, not on a cell phone, on a landline, right? And say, what do you want for dinner? And I might say meatloaf. And she'd say, okay, here's how you make meatloaf. So it was a wonderfully independent childhood where my friends, we really just all took care of each other. We were not, no one was wealthy financially in that neighborhood. But boy, looking back, we had a wealth of relationships growing up. Um, Successes, tensions, everything that really kind of builds good character and good people, I was able to experience in that childhood.
How many siblings you have? Two?
I have an older brother.
An
He's
older
about 3
brother.
years older than me. It's interesting. Uh, Being siblings, raised in the same household, we have a lot of things that are similar. He was very accomplished academically, um, and I I think some people use that as motivation for academic accomplishment themselves. I wound up looking at it a little differently, where I looked at it and said, "Ooh, I don't know if I could ever compete with him academically, but maybe I can find where I thrive." So I think in a generous way, it was permission to kind of, I use it as permission to explore what fulfills myself versus getting into something competitive that maybe I didn't really care for. And to this day, I mean, my degree, the reason I moved to Chicago at 18 is I went to art school. He went to University of Chicago, which is one of the finest collegiate institutions in the world. I went to the Artists of Chicago, which is a very fine art school, but very different, right? It was a spot where I felt I could thrive and learn in a way that suited me versus in a way that maybe was prescribed at the time in the 80s. And
I think that's very smart because instead of trying to compete in somewhere where you already had recognized, that there was a different ability or a different intelligence, you decided to focus on something that it was more suited for your persona, for your experience, and for what you wanted. So I think that
yeah,
was
if I
right
don't work my
on.
butt off at something, it might just be something I like. And
Yeah.
I did not particularly care for academics, I'll tell you that much.
So how long were you studying art?
Mm. I studied art at the Art Institute for about 4 years. And it, I think the thing, I actually realized 2 or 3 years into studying there that maybe art wasn't my lifelong career. Much like I would see my brother and say, I can't compete academically. I remember I had a roommate, wonderful gentleman. I still talk to him occasionally. He went on to be a professor at Yale and a professor at Notre Dame and an accomplished artist now on the West Coast. But I just remember he was my roommate at the time. I just remember coming home on a Saturday and walking into the apartment, and we used to be able to get these big rolls of butcher paper. They were maybe a meter tall, right? And they could go on for 75 feet, right? Really, really. And he had taken the whole apartment and almost wallpapered the apartment with this, where he practiced his figure sketching. He was a painter, is a painter. And I just remember walking in and being like, "Oof, I like this and I got some dedication, but I don't have this." Um, so I think my big lesson from art school in terms of applying it to later in my life was there's no real one way to solve a problem. I mean, ultimately, the beauty of art school, for whoever frou-frou as it may be, the perception, I should say, you had to every week get in front of your class, pack up your work, and people would critique it and talk about it. And the professor would read a paper in a more traditional school, right? Or you might have a group project, but ultimately there was something very naked about going up there saying, "This is what I did. Let's talk about it." And boy, some of those people could be brutal in those critiques. I had an old friend say to me once, I was like, "I need to be brutally honest," and they looked at me and they said, you know, you need to be honest, not brutal. Um,
Yeah.
but that was not necessarily the environment in Chicago in the art school. So it takes some bravery to go up and kind of open the kimono and say, "Here's what I drew, painted, photographed, printed, whatever it is. Here's why it's important to me. Here's the problem I was looking. Here's what I was looking to express and solve," and then just get that really raw feedback of whether it was successful or not. And that's something that I think has served me later in life very well.
Definitely, like you can go to any meeting room, to any board meeting later in life, and handle the meeting, be able to understand the people who are in the meeting. Okay, presenting a campaign for a client if you had already presented something so deep and being so vulnerable as people get into when presenting their art.
Yeah. I mean, I may collapse after the meeting, but I can certainly get myself up for the meeting.
What did they say? Fake it before you make it.
Yep. Yep. And then, after graduation, I think like a lot of artists, um, the struggle is real to get a founding in the art world. It is almost equal parts ability to produce and ability to network. Um, you know, the platforms now to get work out there are so much more democratic and accessible than they were then. There was no internet to post my work on. If I made a short film, I had to borrow a friend's loft or rent a theater or something to get it shown. And there were videotapes, so you could maybe distribute videotapes. But now it's upload it to YouTube or five or six other competitive platforms in no time at all, right?
Yeah.
And for me, as much as I love what I call the studio work, the production work, um, it really takes a special individual to be able to go and create that to go get a gallery to represent. And when I talk about kind of that, my old roommate, that was something he was really willing to do, and something that I was never. I'm not sure I was willing to pay that price. So I think a lot of artists are like that. We love the work we do, but doing the work and getting the work out there are separate things.
Yeah.
And so, like a lot of artists, I found myself in advertising. I had a wonderful part-time job in college. It was in a real estate office, and I had the gentleman that owned it looked at me one day and he said, "You're too smart to be picking up my phone for the rest of your life. And I have a friend who owns an ad agency, and I think you'd be a fit." And went to go work at that ad agency for about through 2, 3, 4 years, and then I got poached by a client, which happens. And that client was EMI Music, Virgin Records,
Oh,
and
nice.
did some in-house marketing for them for about 2 or 3 years, and then hit kind of an interesting little point in life. One of the things I've learned along the way is that people who are in a state of change are more likely to change other things. Um, I'm getting married, so sure, I'll buy that house, right? When you think of these life cycle or big moves, and the division got spun off. I was not invited to go with the spinoff, but wound up with a nice severance package. Um, my wife at the time was pregnant with our first child, and I had skin cancer. I had melanoma.
Oh
So I
my
had those
God.
three things, right? So cancer, pregnant wife, laid off. So what do you do? Found a company. Because
You
what
needed a
else?
little more
I'm
chaos.
already in that state of change. Yeah. And that's when I founded Home Run Media.
Wow, that's amazing. How was it? The news about the melanoma, how was it delivered to you?
So I had a like what I call a mole on the back of my neck, and it was just a mole, whatever. And I remember thinking, "Hey, look, it's not a big deal. It's just a little birthmark mole, whatever." I have a lot of freckles, not anymore, but I used to, so it wasn't anything shocking. And I just remember thinking, "I'll deal with it when it becomes an issue." And one day I was in the shower and I reached the back of my neck and was bleeding. So I said, "Oh, I'll go see a dermatologist about it. I'll go see a skin doctor about it, right?" And I go see the skin doctor. And another lesson I've learned in life is I always want to have to follow up on my own test results. If the doctor calls me with the test results, it's probably not a good thing. So I went and I got it checked out. And I remember specifically it was in February because it was on President's Day, which is a holiday, like third week of February here. So it was a Monday. And and I got a call from my doctor on Tuesday morning. And he was basically like, "This is cancerous. You need to come in." And what's interesting is, again, this was, golly, let me think about this. This was 99. So there was internet. There might have even been WebMD, but I'm not sure it was like the first thing you did. Now, of course, just go to Google and you say, okay, skin cancer, right? And I learned years and years later that 1 in 6 people with melanoma diagnosed with melanoma die from
Oh, wow.
it. That's what I said when I read that 20 years later. But I didn't know at the time. I was like, whatever. And these doctors, especially surgeons, they can be very confident. I think it's just part of the persona, right? So I went to see this surgeon and got the consultation, and was like, here's what I remember most about it. His name was uh, Dr. Gupta, and he was like, very matter of fact, we'll go in, we'll do surgery, you can come in the day before, and we do something called the sentinel node biopsy. And the sentinel node biopsy, effectively, what they do is they shoot a little bit of dye in the site of the melanoma, and then when you go into surgery the next day, they trace the dye to the closest lymph node, and they pull that lymph node, because that lymph node would be if the cancer spread, that would be the first place the cancer would spread to. And I just remember sitting there thinking, and he's telling me he's going to do this. And I remember looking at him and saying, like, so, like, how many times have you done this procedure? And his response was like, 3 times a week since I invented it 25 years ago.
Oh my God.
Like, I know, right? And it's like, all right. And I think there was something about his confidence and maybe the whole medical team's confidence that kind of masked for me the seriousness of the idea that, like, my wife is pregnant, and I have cancer, right? Um, so yeah, so very fortunate. It had not spread. I've not had any relapse. I am a devotee of sunscreen, of sunblock,
I
for
don't
sure.
use a lot, but you use it, huh? It's a
Yeah.
must, right?
First of all, I tan the color of a lobster, right? It's like I immediately go red. But especially now, where I spend a lot of time, at least half the year,
Outside.
skiing
Yeah.
outside, and skiing, it can be very nasty because not only do you have the direct sunlight from above, it reflects off the snow back up.
Yeah. It's true.
So it can be, yeah.
So after Virgin Music,
Hmm.
uh, working there, did you start the company then?
I started the company. I wound up with, I think it was 3 months of severance. And so to roll back a second, I'm working for Virgin, and I get a call from a friend of mine who has a product that he's advertising. And he calls me and he says, I have an agency and I don't really trust them. I think they're screwing me. Joaquin, you own an agency. You've never heard this, right? And he goes, do me a favor, look over the work they're doing for me. Let me know what you think. And I look over the work and I say, it's a B plus. They're doing all right. And he calls me back a week later and he goes, I know you said it's a B plus, but I'm sure they're screwing me. He's like, can you do the work for me? And I said, I'm an in-house agency for a record label. Like, we don't really take outside clients. And the agency had a really weird structure where there were, we'll call them co-CEOs or co-presidents. Um, there was a minority ownership of the record label, and these two kind of co-CEOs owned the other part of it. And I used to meet with them every Wednesday morning. Lee and Wes were their names. And I just remember looking at them and saying, give my report about what's going on. And he's like, check this out. This guy I know called me up and he wants me to do this media buying for him. And their eyes light up. And basically they're like, hold on, my dog's gonna go here. And basically their eyes light up and they're like, if you land that business, we'll give you 20% of the revenue. So immediately my paycheck almost doubled, right? About a year later, it's time to renew the contract. And the client says, okay, we'll renew the contract. We just want to put a clause in there. Right now there's, I don't know, this a 3 month cancellation clause, or six months, whatever it was. We just want to make it really, really clear to your bosses that we're not there for the company, we're not there for the organization, we're there for you. So we want to insert a clause that basically says, if you leave, Andrew leaves for any reason, we get to terminate the contract in 15 days or shorter termination clause. So we just added the termination, whatever. About 3, 4 weeks later, that's when we found out that the business was being spun off. The division I ran was not going to be operational anymore. And I called up that client. And I was basically like, I'm thinking of opening my own shop. And they said, okay. They said, we pay you a 5%, we pay the company a 5% commission. I said, yeah. They go, how much of that do you get? And I said, 20%, you get 1% of the commission. And they said, okay, if you reduce it to that, we'll sign with you as an independent. So I went from 1% of the billing as revenue to 4% for myself. So I really was very lucky to open up the door with, a very good client that was a very lucrative. So I went from doubling to doubling beyond that. Then I went to Virgin's biggest competitor because they were spinning off the division. I didn't have a non-compete. I wound up getting them as my second client. So I was
Wow.
very, very fortunate very quickly.
Very strategic going to the competitor. Very smart.
Yeah, I was very lucky. A wonderful person. The media director there was someone I'm still in touch with, love her to death. And I ran into her at a conference and we didn't know each other really.
Wow.
And and I really just went to the conference to drum up business, right? Even, and then I went into her and I said, hey, I'm Andrew. I'm from so and so. And she was like, oh, she's like, I don't know what we're going to be doing, but we'll find a way to work together. So again, just super, super fortunate. Like,
And their interest was in selling records. Like back in the day, they were selling CDs.
yeah. So if you can remember back, and I think they might still produce them, but like an example of this would be now that's what I call music, where they put together these compilations of different music. So I was in charge of it was CDs, but what I was focused on was like multi CD sets. So now that's what I call music, might be one CD. We might have had a CD set of 7 CDs that were all about music from the 50s or love songs. I remember we had one called the Love Collection that was a huge hit. So we were focused on that, and it was a lot of it was at the time it was all TV advertising.
Oh, wow.
As a matter of fact, I remember about 3 or 4 years into owning my agency, I had a client call me up one day and he said, because it was all 800 numbers, right? It was all getting people to order on the phone. And he calls me up and says, we think this internet thing might be stealing some of our phone orders. And not long after that, we really made the decision that we were only going to advertise for brands that had websites on their ads, which now sounds so, who doesn't, right? It sounds so stupid. But at the time, it was unique. We'll say
For
I wouldn't
sure.
necessarily say innovative, it was unique. And that's when we became really focused on attributing internet sales to TV ads, which is a lot of what my agency focused on for years and years and years. When we run an ad on TV, we ask people to go to the internet and then try and understand how many people did the TV ad drive to the internet, how many of those people bought, what was the value of those people, what was the long tail, the short tail, all.
Kind of like the beginning of inbound marketing.
Direct to consumer. I mean, I think it was just an evolution direct to consumer. I think in the 50s and 60s it was direct mail. In the 70s and 80s it was 800 numbers, and kind of through the 90s into the 2000s it kind of transferred into this internet stuff. So I think it was just an evolution of it, more than anything.
Wow. When you started the business, what was the hardest thing about it?
The hardest thing, boy, I don't remember a ton of hardship. I think, it was understanding the difference between being a really good media buyer and being a business owner. A lot of people start. One of the kind of cliches I say is a lot of people start businesses because they just think they could do the job better than their previous boss. My boss knows nothing. I create all this value for them. I do all the buying. Blah 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 blah. Right. And I think there's this absence of understanding of cash flow or managing people or contracting or legal or things like that. So I think for me, the hardest part was understanding my responsibilities as a business owner and really my responsibilities to the business more than anything else, versus my ability to be a really good media buyer.
How long did you have that company?
16, 17 years. We went through a couple of different phases. Kind of the first bigger transition was really focusing on brands that only had internet websites, really. Um, and then we kind of transitioned into focusing on brands that work with sports marketers. So we had a suite of clients that would focus on working that want to work directly with either sports leagues or sports broadcasters. So we wound up kind of doing a lot of that stuff.
Oh, wow, very specialized. I love the name.
Yeah, yeah, that was dumb luck. I really, that I remember really well, which was it kind of popped in my head, and I remember thinking, boy, what a stupid name. But I got to write something on the paperwork. So I'm going to give myself like 72 hours to think of a better name. I just really couldn't. So, so it was dumb luck that 10, 15 years later, I wound up really doing a lot of that sports marketing. And then after home run, I wound up, I call it the entrepreneurial midlife crisis, right? I wound up spending some time in Asia, India for a bit. I did a little bit of consulting there and then wound up. We were in the agency, we were one of the very early adopters of EOS or traction. At the time, there were 10 coaches in the country that did it. So I knew the power of having an operational system in the business. Provides a lot of discipline for myself, a lot of discipline for the team, and really a lot of clarity. I think is really the biggest thing. It's like a common language between people.
Yeah,
Um,
for those who don't know, like, there's different systems. Many of us know kind of like Mastering the Rockefeller Habits by Bert Harnish or Scaling Up, which is the evolution of that. But there's this one called Traction, which I read a book also, like it goes with it, Get a Grip. It's kind of like a novel of putting
yeah,
traction into place.
yeah,
But it's fantastic. The especially for entrepreneurs, I guess, who have not had the experience of doing processes and such. I think it is easy to get a mindset that all the collaborators can look into, understand, and it feels like it helps you set guidelines of where we're going and how we're going there, and of how to bring value or ask questions or bring red
yeah.
flags or bottlenecks or whatever.
Every one of these systems, and I know there's another one called Pinnacle, I believe. They all they all have slightly different names, but effectively they all have what's called a one-page plan. Um, Scaling Up calls it a one-page strategic plan.
And it's two
Traction calls it
pages.
a VTO. And to me, like what it allowed, it's so easy as a business owner to want to solve everything yourself. And it's so difficult to scale that way. How many times do we say, let me just do it? Because by the time I teach you, I'll have it done. Well, then you're stuck in that trap. You're doing it next week again, right? So I loved that one page plan because it had values, it had long term goals, it had short term goals, it created a whole set of boundaries. And when someone would come to me with an idea, um, it was really easy for me to kind of hold up the one page plan and say, show me where this idea lives on here. Does it support a core value? Is it driving a 90-day goal? Is it driving an annual goal? Like, what's the deal here, right? And over time, they wound up kind of managing to the paper. And we would lock ourselves in a room every 90 days and update the paper, and everyone got some say into it and all that. But ultimately, it allowed me to kind of look at the team and say, you have the ability to do stuff, you have the ability to solve problems, you have the ability to take initiatives. all I care about is we agreed on this one piece of paper. Does it live on here somewhere? It's a super, super powerful tool. The hardest part is getting the first year, and this is kind of where that term traction comes from, I think, where people start to see the value in it. At first, it feels like it's just one more thing to do, one more thing to report, one more thing to update. But I think over time, that the rhythm and the information really does set people free because they just understand the rules of the game.
And your experience with it, did you start applying it yourself or did you hire someone from day one?
Mm, I was definitely too frugal to hire someone. So I applied to myself. I had a forum mate from EO who was a year or two in front of me in applying it in their business. And I remember reading the book. So Traction, Get a Grip are very similar. What I would say is Traction is the manual. So people who like to read manuals, Traction could be it. And Get a Grip is kind of anecdotal story. They really get you to the same place, but different people learn differently. So I think in my observation, they're really very much the same, but for two different sets of learners. And I had someone, but at the time it was only Traction. It was the only book. I think now they have 6 or 7 or 8 books carrying various topics. At the time it was only Traction, and you can read the manual, but sometimes it's hard to visualize. And I remember sitting in on a couple of their meetings and just being blown away, seeing it in action. It's very different to see something in action than it is to just read about it. So I wound up thinking I can implement it myself, and I think I did an okay job. Um, Doing it again, I think I would hire someone. They call them implementers in that world, and in the scaling up world, which is actually what I used to coach. They would call them coaches, a little bit different. But I think I would. I know I'd make that investment.
So, it's really interesting the different processes that you have gone through. The part of advertising, which I can relate a lot to, I was lucky to go visit your agency in Chicago. It was in a wonderful, beautiful, modern building. It felt kind of like a warehouse, similar to what we have here. You've been here
Mm-hmm.
also as well. Um, and I remember you had this policy that everybody would do daily huddle every day, and anybody who was in the building. So if you had guests there like us, we participated in the daily huddle.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's palpable when you go into someone's office and you can feel culture in it. And I know that this is something that of a strong suit for you. You are so good with culture. You're so good in communication. I remember at one point you shared with me all the backbone of your business. Like you gave me like the manuals for people who were onboarding, all the information, what the business was about. It was a beauty. Is this something that you're passionate about?
Yeah. So to me, I got a lot to say about this. So I don't know how to organize my thought right now. It's much easier to grow a business by growing the people within the business than it is to grow the business, in my opinion.
Nice.
I think part of that is my point of view that I actually really,
I love that.
I love the people side of the business. That is really, I think that people think of philanthropy maybe about, did we pack backpacks for the local school kids, or did we write a check to the Cancer Foundation, or whatever it was. I think that one of the least appreciated parts of business ownership or entrepreneurship is the philanthropy of creating really good jobs for people. And I focused on. We had a goal. It was my own goal. It's nothing I really shared with the team. But my goal was I wanted everybody to be able to buy a home when they worked at home on media. Whether they choose to or not, it's their money. I can't control that, right? But I wanted to have a level of compensation, a level of knowledge. We took 2 years to teach people how to, when we decided to go open book in our business, right, and really show people the financials that, part of that was educating them about here's how you can apply it to your life, right? It was the same thing. We get, look, it's television money. It's silly money. We would get a fraction of it, but it was not uncommon. We'd get a check for $488,000 in a week, right? That's just the way it works. Of which we kept, I don't know, 20 grand or something. I can't do the math that fast anymore, right? But it took a lot of time to explain to people that, like, yeah, we maybe did 20 million in revenue last year. I was like, well, let's go look at the parking lot because I still got a Volkswagen. Like, when you see me with a Mercedes, come ask for a raise, right? No offense to your client, of course.
No, no worries at all.
I
You
love
couldn't have a
Volkswagens.
Touareg also. I mean,
Yeah, whatever. I love Volkswagen, but so
that's
for
a great
me, it
point because
was
sometimes people see the revenue and it's like, wow, this guy is a millionaire. And then when you start looking at all the things that have to happen for you to have that, then you understand that, that is not like that. I have a question, percentage wise in your market, what was it, like 25% commission and business fee for agencies that put advertising in TV, or was it a 15%? What was a custom?
so 15% was the cap. But I think more typical was in that like 8% range. Some really big clients, it could be 4 or 5%. The dirty secret is, it costs $400,000 to advertise on Monday Night Football, and it's pretty much the same amount of work as a, you know, $3,000 spot on HGTV.
Hmm.
So we had to kind of pass along that economy of
Makes
scale.
sense.
Yeah, but yeah, but we did, a lot of it. Like, look, here's one thing I can confidently say about that business, and is everyone was better the day they walked out of that office than the day they walked in. And
Nice.
we did a lot of things. I remember we had one quarter where we had a goal where everybody had to do a presentation in front of the company, but it could be a presentation on anything you wanted because we wanted people to feel confident to get up and speak, right? And we thought, okay, if we make them speak about something, then they're gonna, they're going to worry about the topic. But if we ask them to speak about something they already know, then they're just thinking about, how do I present? How do I tell the story on a slide deck? I remember we did
Nice.
this thing where it was like, people would write a slide and had a story, like a paragraph on it. It's like, what's the rule of slides? 7 words or 6 words or something on a slide. That's all you're allowed, right? So we do that. I remember one of my favorite ones that we did. We called them TED Thursdays. TED Talks are 18 minutes long traditionally. I would buy the company lunch. We would all make up a plate. We'd pile in a conference room. We'd spend 18 minutes watching the TED Talk together. We'd have a 12-minute debrief on the conversation, and then we would go back to work, right? We just did a lot of these things to grow the individual, not just in their knowledge of media buying or traffic placement or accounting. We did plenty of that too, but just the more confident they were, the more skills they had as an individual, the more contributed they were. I, I remember we were doing advertising, right? A lot of times it's like, you got a pitch coming up. You're going to be there to midnight or 2 a.m. working on it together. And I had a great person who worked for me named Andrea. And Andrea was my bookkeeper at the time, right? And she's 5:30, 6 o'clock. She's leaving the office, pokes her in the conference room. We know we're going to be there a while. And she's like, is there anything I can do for you? Like, can I order you dinner before I go? Something. I'm like, no, Andrea, it's all good. Andrea looks at me and she goes, do you remember what my major was in college? And I look at her and I go, theater. And she goes, yeah, specifically what? I go, you're a director. And she goes, yeah. And she goes, you're going to be doing any storytelling on this presentation? And I was like, here's your seat, Andrea. Come on in.
Wow.
Right?
That's an amazing story, man.
Yeah.
I love
So
it.
fortunate.
So I love that because sometimes we lose sight about it. It's not only about, it's great to make jobs, but it's also great to live where one stands. And I am completely into that. I have it written here in front of my office, and then I'm so into that. I like people to gain knowledge of leadership and how they can be better leaders as they are already leaders for their brothers, for their siblings, for people that look up to them, and they might not even know, but everybody's a leader to someone. So I'm intentful in like pressing on, hey guys, let's read. This is a great book for you. You're gonna enjoy this one.
Mhm.
And I think that's something really relevant. I really take and I love the idea about making a presentation of whatever they want so that they can talk about something they're passionate already and not something that one wants them to talk about. But one thing is for certain, presentation skills are very good for any business. Like people know how
Mhm.
to sell their ideas, especially in advertising. And sometimes it has probably more to do with the confidence that they present their ideas with than if the idea what it is in the end. But I like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And going
Many,
through,
many years after um, we were no longer a team, I got a call that my one of our team members had moved to LA and he was back in town, and they said we're all going to meet for a drink. Why don't you come meet us for a drink? So it was basically myself and the leadership team 2 or 3 years after Home Run Media, right? And one of them looks at me and he said, "Do you know what you used to say that would scare the hell out of us?" And I was like, "Oh, here it comes. Here's where Andrew messed up." And they said, "We'd come to you with the challenge and you would ask us a bunch of questions, right? And then we'd ask you what to do." They said, "Do you remember what you used to say to that, Andrew?" I was like, "Oh, yeah, it was the same thing. I don't know. I trust you to make the decision." And they said, "We hate it. It was terrible." But now, a couple of years on, we see the value of that, especially when you go to an environment, maybe the boss isn't like that,
yeah.
right? So, for me, it was about how do I grow them? Because if I grow them, the business will grow.
And it makes sense also with what you were talking about, the system or about traction, for example, how having that system helps you people get, you know, the idea they can make decisions, that they can make changes, that they can be impactful. So in that sense, you're giving them probably the biggest thing that you can give them because you're helping them become accountable. And
Mhm.
in doing that, you're giving them trust. And in trusting them, you're telling them, you're appreciated. You're a very relevant part of the team here in this company.
And it's so much easier to solve problems with two, three, four, five brains working on it than one. I don't need all that pressure to
Yeah.
solve every darn problem. It's too much pressure.
Tell me a little bit about your experience through coaching. How it must have been different going into so many different types of teams and industries than probably you were accustomed to. Um,
Great learnings,
yeah.
great lessons as a coach, great lessons. I was fortunate enough I worked with about 12 clients, and it was really interesting a couple of ways. So first of all, some of them were just like small 5-person marketing companies, $1 to $2 million in revenue a year. And some of them are like literally billion-dollar manufacturing companies.
Oh,
And it's so interesting to just see different ownership styles, different business styles, different problems to solve. And the beauty of coaching is I'm not responsible for solving any of that. I'm responsible for helping the client or whatever you want to call it figure out a solution. So what I needed to always do was keep my I would always have this visualization where I was walking in with a toolbox. And the toolbox were things like SWOT analysis, uh, models for compensation plans. Like I never said whether they could get paid 15 or $20 an hour, but I could say, here's how you figure out how much they can get paid, right? There are all kinds of tools I would bring to this and introduce to these clients that would help them solve these problems. But boy, do I get a lesson out of it. And the challenge for me was keeping myself sharp. Like I had to be the beautiful thing about working with an organization like Petra. I don't know how many coaches they have now. They had 7 or 8 at the time, but we kept each other really, really, really sharp. There was a lot of learning. I remember one of the things that people used to brag on how many books they read, business books they read
hmm.
constantly. So for me, I think as a coach, in some ways, you're sort of looked at as like a teacher, but I just felt like the ultimate student in that environment.
How long were you doing that?
About 2 years. And
Couple of
then
years.
I got very, very sick of the travel. Most of my clients were not, I was living in Chicago at the time. Most of my clients were not in the Chicago area. I would routinely be on the road from Tuesday to Thursday or Tuesday to Friday, 3, 4 weeks out of the month, and just kind of looked around and said, as much as I love, the customers I work with, the problems I get to solve, um, it was just not the lifestyle outside of work that I really wanted. It was just too demanding travel wise
It's funny
for
how
me.
everybody wants to travel, and like travel is related to a wonderful life, and exploring new places. There's so many great things about traveling, but traveling can be so tiresome as well. Like it can be really tiring. It can be just so demanding. Hotels and airplanes and time zones. It
I
is.
I I when I had the agency, I would travel quite a bit, over 100,000 miles a year. And I remember I would go to Europe, go to Japan, spend a lot of time in New York or LA, Miami. And then I started was doing coaching. I remember being in a small Midwestern city in the winter at about 12:45 a.m. after midnight on a shuttle bus to a Hampton Inn and thinking to myself, I don't think this is worth the price. Nothing wrong with that city. It's a beautiful little city, but it's just not worth the price.
Yeah.
They used to pick me up in a limo to go to the Super Bowl. That sounds so terrible. So travel was a lot easier when it was, you know, to a little more cosmopolitan places. We'll say.
And, that's something that I admire from you. Like you are someone who knows what you want, and you work towards that which you want. I remember you have a tattoo regarding travel. Can you share that quote with us?
Yeah, it's don't tell me how educated you are, tell me how much you have traveled.
I love it.
You
I
know,
love
they
it. Yeah. So,
and I learned from books, but I learned more from Joaquin, ultimately,
it is
you
amazing
know.
what one learns from traveling, from understanding other cultures. You become so much more tolerant. But I agree that is, and in that sense, when I started my EO experience in Guatemala, we did that first day that they train you on Gestalt and all that stuff, which is very helpful. And you talk about the timeline that we have. It's a lifeline, and you say which are the 10 most happy moments you've ever had and which are the 10 worst moments that you've ever had in your life. And that was really impactful for me because I had never seen it like that, like graphically. And which ones should I put? Was this impactful? Was it more impactful? And it kind of like did it, and then I thought, how can I make more happy moments? Like, what are happy moments? And kind of like understanding how much life we have, the memento mori, how much years we're gonna live, how many we have already lived, and what is it all about? Like, right, okay, we're gonna do a business, we're gonna work, we're gonna do this hard journey of becoming an entrepreneur. We're gonna have all these responsibilities with all our teammates and whatnot. But what for, right? For me, I
Mhm.
guess, in my sense, it's always like, yeah, I wanna continue rock climbing or doing adventure sports and maybe go do enduro somewhere else or go climb another route in a different place. And that's something that moves me. And we've talked about this with you, and you're so passionate about skiing, and you actually
Mhm.
did something that I admire deeply, like saying, okay, if I do this sport which I love, I want to be near some good places where that happens. Tell us a
Yeah,
little bit about
yeah.
that process, how it's been, moving your life from Chicago to the beautiful state of Utah and being closer to nature and being able to ski more often.
Well, first of all, we have to get you out here to climb
I
because as
know.
a dude who does not climb, it is clear to me, even to me, how amazing between Moab and northern Utah, how amazing the climbing is. So
It's a mecca for sure.
please, please. Um, I relate it to that quote that you look at. You pick up your eyes and you look at now, which is where be, you want to be where your feet are. Paraphrase a little bit. And to me, there's something about skiing specifically. It's one of the few times in my life where I'm not time traveling. When I mean by time traveling, where I'm mentally living in the past, something that happened, or mentally living in the future, something I desire. When I'm skiing, it's one of the few times that I'm extraordinarily, even with my mindfulness practice, skiing, I'm just extraordinarily present. I think it has to do with, I'll ski off the mountain if I'm not, I don't know, but it is just where I want to be. So when you think about, we're happiest when we are where our feet are. I just needed to get like, if that takes a physical change of location, so be it. Now, I love living in Chicago. I lived there for 30 years. And there's still some great things about it. But it started to feel a little bit like it changes, but it's all the same. I might look at there's always a restaurant in that spot, right? Maybe it was a falafel place, maybe it's a Chinese place now, but there was a restaurant. So there's something about where it changes, yet it's always the same. And I said, well, if I need to have a different type of happiness, I need to maybe change that environment more drastically. So I looked at it from like a business problem, which is like, here's the constraints. I want to be near a big airport so I can still continue to do some travel that I love. I want to ski and I want to be able to have a long-term partner and I want to be able to, you know, enhance her, be in a place where her life is enhanced as well, right? And that was, for us, it was Utah for sure. I'm lucky enough. I look out the window right here. I'm looking out the window right here, and I see the ski runs. We just got about 6 inches of snow this week. One of the first real snows of the year,
Oh, wow.
and it's still so exciting to me to look out and see those. Right, and I skied 82 times last year. Right,
Wow.
I would love to do more than that sometime soon. But yeah, for me, it was just if this is the thing that truly brings me joy. My kids are grown, right? It's like it's a different thing. I'm still their parent, but you play a different role when they're in their 20s than when they're in their teens or preteen, right? So, I didn't have that to bring me joy in the way it used to. The other thing was, I hadn't thought about this in a little bit, but we used to say that I want to live in a place where people want to come to visit. It was a tool to get my kids to keep visiting me.
Nice. This is
Right?
such a good
They're
idea.
skiers. Yeah. So it was like, all right, if I live in a place where skiing is accessible, there's an airport they can get to. Every year for the holidays, they get a ski pass from me for their holiday gift
You're a
and for their
complete
Hanukkah gift.
strategist, my
And
friend.
yeah, always, right? So yeah, so great move, great lifestyle move for myself and for
So
us. Yeah.
80 something days, that's 25% of the year.
Not bad, huh?
Not bad at all.
It
That's
also took a
awesome.
little mindset shift too in last year where it used to be if I can't get 7 hours, it ain't worth it. Dude, I was 25 minutes away. And then very early in the season, I finished a project. It was like 1 o'clock, and typically the mountain stops closes at about 4. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, what else am I going to do for the next 2 hours? And it completely changed that mindset from like lots of like as many like I can't do it in this, so I'm not going to do it to like, all right, I've got a call to 1. Let's go. And I had plenty of full days too. Don't get me wrong.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's something I look up to, my friend. And it's in my wishful thinking. I think I have to work a little bit more on that in the sense of I love climbing. I love to be able to go and get on rocks. Guate has very good rocks, and there's a lot of difficulty here that I still can work on. But there's some places in the world that are just made out of rock. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's like
I have
living
a
in
neighbor who says
Yosemite.
Utah is one big rock.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. A lot of it's like a business, there's so many like business lessons that I've been able to apply to my life. People think of a strategy. I need a strategy for my business. And not many people necessarily say, well, what's the strategy for my life? Right. And if you think about, okay, how do I make my product, my business, my service easier for people to use? Use that term friction. How do you reduce friction? Right.
Mhm.
Well, if I love to ski and you love to climb, how do if we just look at it from the business perspective of like, how do I reduce friction? What's the friction that gets me from 15 days a year climbing to 30 days a year climbing? How do I remove that friction? For me, that friction was I had to use, when I was in Chicago, I used to have to get on a plane,
Yeah.
took that friction out.
You told me there was a mountain lion visiting the other day.
Yes.
Did it return?
My poor, my poor chickens. Yes. It is hanging around for sure. We had all kinds of interesting wildlife. So I have a couple of acres. We have a couple of horses. We got some cats and some chickens and some other fun stuff, dogs and all that stuff. But yeah, one day I was sitting doing some work, and we have these windows that go along the back of the house, and I see out of the corner of my eye a strange looking dog run across my porch. And I had the funny thought, that dog is running towards my chicken coop, and it didn't look like a domestic dog. So I like walk out to the chicken coop to take a look, and there is a full, huge bobcat, which is a mountain lion, sitting there looking back at me.
Oh my God. With a chicken in his mouth?
No chicken. And we were well, the funny thing is the chickens were roaming around, and I was like, so I had to do this thing where I was weighing, like, how do I get the chickens back and locked in their coop? I think that what I've learned about the bobcat since then is they really don't want to mess with humans.
Oh,
Um,
good.
so I was luckily able to get the chicken back. I can't say that when the bobcat cat came by a couple of nights later, we might have had a little problem, and we're down a couple of chickens.
Shoot.
But yeah,
Different problems.
yeah, definitely different problems to solve. I learned a lot around that for sure. But it's I'm in my 50s. As we age, unless we're very intentional about it, it's really easy to not learn new things or not have new problems to solve. We become kind of experts and we become comfortable in that. So that was another really nice advantage of just changing the environment drastically.
It was a great
Going
takeaway.
from
Maybe not intentional. Maybe you recognized it after it had happened.
very much, but it's like, oh, now I have just a whole other set of problems to solve for, and it's a real good way to keep the brain active. It's moved
Absolutely.
from, you know, uh, how do I get this reservation in this restaurant that I want? To like, what kind of fencing keeps bobcats out? It's a very different lifestyle.
I bet.
Um, yeah, and I miss some of the, I miss a lot of the people in the old life. That's for sure. Uh, and I definitely miss some of the restaurants in the old life. But the benefit is I've gotten better at cooking than I used to be. So,
Oh,
you know,
you must be a great cook. So I know that we have spoken about, you are venturing into new business. You are looking for an opportunity to continue thriving in creating those cultures, in motivating the team, and in doing the entrepreneurial once again. But this time from a
mhm.
different perspective. This time from the opportunity of being able to look for a business that might be for sale, acquiring it, turning it over, etc. And you've been in this process for some time now. Not a lot of people know about this process. I remember Andrew J. Sherman talking about mergers and acquisitions in that fantastic class
Yeah,
in MIT. And he spoke about this thing that we're living in this moment where a lot of the baby boomers have a business and they want to sell it, but their family are not interested in doing what dad used to do, and they want to do
yep,
something else. So, and they wanting to continue the team, having the opportunity to grow, etc. Tell us a little bit about our experience.
yeah. So I've been looking for about a year now, and the startup is. I mean, we covered it earlier in our conversation how I was had a very atypical or not typical startup because I wound up opening the door with a couple of really good clients. But I would say that that's the 1% of experiences, not the 99% of experiences. And in the States, there's kind of a wonderful program called it's an SBA 7A program, which essentially the government will back a loan to acquire a profitable business. And it winds up being a really nice out for the seller. It is the case. Like they have it, they run the business for a long time. The kid doesn't want any part of it. The kid wants to go be a computer scientist somewhere, right? Or they don't want to run the parents' business. So I can kind of come in, work with the bank, and get a loan that backs me to acquire a profitable business. It's becoming more and more popular. As a matter of fact, I did a talk at one of the local universities recently about my experience there. But I like it because it's not a startup, it's not a turnaround, it's something that I can go in and accelerate, right? Also, a lot of times these business owners, when they've been running it a long time, like
Grown
I don't want to say they
comfortable.
lose the passion. I don't want to say they lose the passion for the business, but they never develop those business skills that we talk about.
The
Right? I have a
conformity,
comfortable life. What's that?
the conformity that you were talking about, growing
Yeah.
comfortable, not putting a
I have
process
a
like traction in it, like just that small difference, which is not small, but someone like that, it'll take it to
yeah.
a different level.
And this is where I find that having had that experience coaching, where I've seen lots of different industries, lots of different models work. I've seen the model where it's can I get 1/4 or 1% of the market and I'll be rich? And I've seen the one where it's like I can own 80% of the market. And so I think having seen all these different things, it's going to allow me to kind of come into an opportunity, take what I've learned and apply it and accelerate it pretty quickly.
Nice. And it's been a great conversation. We're already over an hour, and that's okay. But coming on to an end, I would like to ask still a couple of questions. One is, if you could speak to someone who is no longer alive, who would that be?
I never got to know my mother as an adult. My mother passed away when I was in my mid early 20s. Uh, and I think that now, basically we're my kids' age now. And I think that like I am excited, having seen my kids as infants through kind of early adulthood at this point. I'm excited to see what their more established adulthood looks like and beyond. And I never got to share that experience with my mother. So that's a really easy one. I would love to.
Normally I do a question about what would you tell your 18-year-old self, or 20-year-old self, coming out of university and starting a new life, something that might be a nugget of wisdom that you can share that it'll help that journey, or go through that journey not more easily, but with a little insight. If that was
Yeah.
the case, what would you share?
Keep tacking your artwork to the wall every week and getting your feedback on it. Never lose that muscle. Never get afraid. Keep opening that window to yourself and your work and your thoughts. Keep sharing it. Keep tacking that artwork up on the wall.
Nice. Yeah, something about showing up, right? Like
Mhm.
just putting yourself in the uncomfortable position and saying, "What the hell, I'll do it," not backing up. Huh? It's they say that success 95% of the times is just about showing up.
It's true. I think that's a lot of truth for sure.
Nice. Anything else that you would like to share, my friend, to our viewers and listeners out there?
Well, I don't know. First of all, to all the viewers and listeners who got this far into this podcast, kudos. Congratulations. That's very impressive. Uh, so I don't know that I have any words of wisdom. Listen for the next episode in 15 days after this one. Joaquin is doing wonderful work. And yeah, just keep listening because this
Thank you,
dude is
my
going to bring you
friend.
some great wisdom.
I appreciate it a lot, and I loved our talk. I think you're definitely someone with whom I'd like to invite more often. I You have a very good perspective on things. I like how you approach. different problems or frictions in life and then do something about it. I remember at one point we were talking about business and whatnot, and you said something like, "Yeah, but that's what we managers do, right? We just show up and do things." And I was like, "Yeah, sure. That's what I have to do. Stop complaining or just making a mess of it and show up and do things."
Yeah.
So you're a very positive influence in my life. After 10 years of being in accountability, and for the next 10 that are coming, appreciate this time a lot, my friend. Thank you very much. And we'll definitely have you soon. Lots of wisdom in this podcast.
Thank you, Joaquin. Well, I love you to death, buddy. So anytime you call, I'm there for you.
Thank you very much, my friend. Love you back.
All right.
And thank you very
Cheers.
much, my friends. This is a great podcast with Andrew Blickstein from the US. Great friend, many years, tremendous entrepreneur, master at culture, and a great, great human being all around. So thank you very much. Please remember, if you heard something that resonated with you and you thought about someone when you heard it, share this podcast to that person. This is a great way that we can share knowledge and we can continue to grow. And hasta la próxima.